Greetings and welcome to the Department of Tangents podcast, a conversation with author Matt Moore with new music from Steve Poltz. I'm your host, Nick Zano. This is the third and final interview I recorded at NECON 2019, which I have previously described as a mashup of a horror writers conference and summer camp with adult beverages. I attended NECON for the first time in 2018, and this week's guest, Matt Moore, was my roommate. Lucky for me, he is also a fine and thoughtful writer. His debut book is It's Not the End and Other Lies, a collection of short stories about what Moore calls personal apocalypses. What Moore means by that is that these stories aren't necessarily about the apocalypse writ large with zombies or the annihilation of the human race, although it doesn't exclude those possibilities. These stories are more about a moment when a character is facing the end of their life as they have known it so far. There are elements of sci-fi, horror, and what has come to be known as speculative fiction. I would highly recommend picking it up. It's on the Toronto-based Chizine Publications, which has featured the work of some wonderful authors, including Gemma Files, Helen Marshall, Bracken Macleod, David Demchuk, Christopher Golden, Stephen Graham Jones, Paul Tremblay, Ed Kurtz, and many, many more. Moore and I took a deep dive on some of the stories in It's Not the End, and also the craft of writing short stories. It's a magical art all on its own, different from writing novels. Moore found a great quote for it, which he says in the conversation, "Short story writers are like someone who knows how to make one cookie." The stories in this book are concise, and they stop at the exact moment when the story is over, which sounds obvious, but it's a difficult thing to navigate in writing. Moore had another great quote for that he heard recently. Perfection isn't when you can't add anything more. Perfection is when you can't take anything more away. He's currently working on a new novel, and I'm looking forward to see how he applies that to longer work. I was happy to have gotten to read Moore's work and to have spoken with him at NECON. You can hear a bit of the conference going on in the background. When we started the conversation, we were in an out-of-the-way spot where people weren't gathering. But there are giant bags of books that each attendee gets with their admission price, and people were scavenging leftover bags behind us at one point. So you get a little bit of a feel for the festive and active atmosphere at NECON. Based on the joy of the folks around us, Matt and I started to talk a little bit about the psychology of horror writers as well. Stick around after the conversation for new music from next week's guest, Steve Poltz. And now, here's Matt Moore. So the name of the book is It's Not the End and Other Lies.
Yep.
And it's an apocalyptic collection, but not in the way that most people would think of an apocalyptic collection.
Yeah, the way I describe it is personal apocalypses, meaning the world is an ending, just yours. Mm-hmm. And for the characters, that could mean their marriage, their sobriety, it could mean their sense of identity, it could mean their value system. So how we can be affected by even small changes in our lives, and it can completely destroy what our personal world is that we deal with every single day. And so the title, when I was trying to come up with the title for the collection, I came up with all kinds of different titles, and my publisher, Chizine Publications, was saying, close but not really. There's a story in the collection called But It's Not the End. Mm-hmm. And I just liked that idea of, okay, it's apocalyptic, things are ending. And then what Chizine likes to do with its collections is not have blankety blank and other stories. And they had a couple of short story collections that were titled that. Other collections were just something like David Nichols' first collection was called Monstrous Affections. And so they said, come up with it's not the end and something else other than other story. So I just sat down one day with a piece of paper and just started automatic writing, just what is coming to mind. And then Other Lies came out, and I like that because it contradicts the initial statement. Mm-hmm. And I really liked how that played with the theme of personal apocalypses of it's not the end, but if that's a lie, is it the end? And that's kind of one of the common themes of people going through really, really terrible times that threaten and challenge. Like I said, it could be their marriage or their sobriety. It could even be their very, very sense of identity and self. And are they who they really think they are? Mm-hmm. And a couple of challenges might really break that down.
Well, in many cases in these stories, the end seems to come at the, forgive the cliche, but the moment of truth, mm-hmm. that moment where people realize who they are, whether it's a government official who's facing a disaster and he's a rookie government official, or whether it's a junkie who's realizing what that's cost him. So the end is a lot of different things.
Yeah, and with the short story, the short story is a very different animal than the novel. And I was talking with Andrew Piper, who's a Canadian novelist, his probably biggest splash was The Demonologist, but he's really been doing well. And he has said, I don't understand how you can write short stories, that they're such a challenge. And somebody said on Twitter that they were amazed that short story writers are like somebody who knows how to make one cookie.
Right. That's a great way to put that.
And it's an art form, because I'm struggling with novel writing right now. I finished a novel. I've written 2 before. I've seriously started 3 or 4 others, and they just petered out. So I finally finished one. But knowing how to end a story, a short story, is really, really important, because you've only been with a character or characters for a very short period of time, so you don't need a lot of denouement, because it's really not about, well, what happens to them afterwards. It's what is the impression you want to leave with the reader. So it's not like a full 12-course meal, or however many courses a meal is supposed to have. It's an appetizer, or it's a small plate. So you want that taste from beginning to end, with some complexity. But how the story ends is really, really important, because that's the impact you want to leave with the reader.
And some of these stories are only 1 or 2 pages long. Ascension is very short. Full Moon Hill is very short, just a couple of pages. With something like that, do you have to resist the temptation to keep writing, to flesh this idea out? It seems like the impulse is always make this a novel or make this substantial.
No, for the shorter stories, it's a horrible cliche, but it's true that stories tend to be as long as they need to be when they present themselves in your head. There is a certain discipline and skill that you need to build and develop to not do that, and also recognize this is a 3,000 word story, even though the manuscript might be 5,000, or this is an 8,000 word story, even if it's longer than that. And the weight the weight is wrong for how long it is versus the impact that you're having. But I think for those, especially for those shorter stories, they ended where they needed to end for the certain amount of punch. So it's not going longer. It's making sure that you're not getting in the way of that ending by putting too much between the beginning and the end. So those stories, Full Moon Hill, ended exactly where I wanted to end. Ascension was almost like a fever dream of just, I had this idea of what would it like, the story is, what's it like to become a zombie from the zombie's point of view? And with the idea that it's not what you think. It's actually something wonderful and beautiful that is happening. You just don't. People who aren't becoming zombies, who are seeing this apocalypse, think it's horrible. But the person who's becoming a zombie realizes it is something beautiful. And so I just...
They're connecting to a hive mind. They're suddenly seeing everything everywhere.
Spoiler alert, everyone. But
sorry.
It's okay. It's your podcast. But that idea of... I just wrote that kind of off the cuff just to see where it would go. And when I kind of came to that line which ends the story, which I'm not gonna say because I think it's a really good punchy line, I'm like, done. That's it. That's all I need to write. And even if I wrote this some time ago and I don't know if I had anything else in mind, but I'm like, that's it, done. Anything else I add is just going to spoil the impact.
Right. So how long did that one take you to write then? What was the process of that one?
The first draft was, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. I wrote it all in one go, just because it was just this impulse to get it down. It probably took 2 or 3 revisions because it jumps a point of view. We have an unreliable narrator, and it's first-person present tense, but it kind of jumps around. Of this main character can't quite keep track of who they are, and that's the idea of all the zombies are connected in a hive mind, and so the narrator jumps a couple of different identities and isn't quite sure who they are, and they're trying to figure out what's happening to them. And so that fine-tuning, and there's uses of M-dashes and some italics just to try to break up the narrative flow. So that took 2 or 3 passes to do, but it really wasn't a major change to the plot. It was just like stylistically, I want this to be a bit more visually interesting to engage the reader than just flat text on the page.
But it was just you got to that last line and it hit you immediately.
It's like, that's it, done.
This is where.
That's it.
Is it a hard process to find the end of a story usually? Or do you feel it usually when it's sort of, this is where it should go?
I tend to be a plotter more than a pantser, and what that means is a plotter is somebody who will plot out their story before they begin to write it, versus a pantser who's somebody flies by the seat of their pants and just writes off the top of their head. I used to be a pantser, and I have 40 short stories that I began not quite knowing where they were going to go, never found where they were going to go, and so they just ended. So now I tend to I want to have an idea. Where do we begin? How do we end? How do we get there? Don't be a slave to that you can change your mind as you go, and that you can discover new things and go in different directions. But I kind of know where I want it to end. The challenge, though, is even though I know plot-wise and an outline or some notes how we want it to end, it's coming up with that very, very last line. That's the last line is what I want to have the most impact and leave the reader with. That really, this is where I have led you to, and this last line, hopefully, not always, it's a challenge, but hopefully that last line is this is I say in my stories I want to have a mission statement for them. And it's nothing really complicated, like I want you to rethink global politics. I want to tell a good story about, for example, you alluded to a story about a government official. I want to write a story about what it's like to be a civil servant caught between your personal obligations as a person and your family, and that to which you have been elected. And so, working on that story, I knew what the ending was, but trying to come up with the last line that I wanted was just this conflict that you have, and that story called The Machinery of the Government forces this character to choose between his obligations as a member of a family and his obligations as an elected official. And so the last line is, I forget exactly what it is, but it's a fighter jet streaking across the sky to kind of say he has chosen his obligation as it's Canadian, so it's a member of Parliament, and there's an attack on Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada, where I live. And so he goes from being kind of an unimportant newly elected rookie member of Parliament, which is like a House of Representatives in the U.S., and suddenly, due to this attack, other more important cabinet members are killed, and so he is like battlefield promoted to a much more important portfolio, and he doesn't know if he can handle it. His wife is out there somewhere in the attack, and he's pulled in many different directions, and so I intentionally pulled the last line is about a fighter jet to say he has picked his obligation and kind of sacrificed, knowing where his wife is, we don't know what happens to his wife, but kind of sacrificed that knowledge to commit to the counterattack to the attack that's happening on the city.
But there's a subplot in that, which is great that you can have a short story with a plot and a subplot that he's, I don't know how much you want to give away about the story. I'm sorry about the spoiler earlier, but he's facing annihilation, basically, through an invasion, but he and his wife have faced another kind of annihilation before, which makes this both more tragic and gives it a much different context for somebody. So it's his first time facing a government sort of catastrophe of something like this, but he's faced something that's arguably much worse. He and his wife Laura have faced something maybe much worse already.
I don't. It's not much of a plot or a spoiler, but he and his wife wanted to have children, and she had cancer, and so I don't go into too much about that. That took away their ability to have a family. And you mentioned annihilation, and part of what I wanted to do with that story, that's a really good word for it, is my main character is facing physical annihilation because there's an attack on the city, and he's being told, you need to evacuate, we need to get a functioning government out of the city that's being attacked, you need to go. He's facing annihilation at a different level of he sees him because he's a backbencher, which for American audience means in the Canadian system we don't have a president. The executive are members of the legislature. So you take members of the House of Representatives and they become cabinet officials. So he has jumped from basically a rookie member of parliament, first time serving, to a very small cabinet position, which functions similar to cabinet in the United States. And then when the attack comes, he's then promoted because they can't find any of them. So he is facing annihilation in his role as a husband and a neighbor. He gets along with his neighbors, and he participates with his neighbors. So that sense of identity is being annihilated. And then
right, and you do see the neighbors.
Yeah.
They're physically out front, arguing what's going on, and what's going to happen,
and looking to him for leadership. So that element of his personality or his life is being annihilated. And then the story is called The Machinery of Government, and it deals a bit with a technology that allows him to interact with other members of Parliament, and so his humanity is quite literally being stripped away. So he's facing his humanity is facing annihilation in that sense. So what I wanted to do with the story, the origin of the story, I can remember this clearly, is the 1990 miniseries The Stand, with Gary Sinise and Molly Ringwald. Who else was in this? Bill Fabergate, I think is his name, was... should have done better research, but...
he didn't know it was going to come up.
But I like that, and yes, it has its flaws, and people say Jamie Sheridan is a terrible Randall Flagg, and I was 17 when it came out, but I really enjoyed it, because it gave us 4 hours and allowed most of the story to come out. Anyway, there's a line in there where Harold Lauder is talking to Franny Goldsmith, and invites her on a date, and she says, played by Molly Ringwald, "Oh, sorry, my friend and I we have tickets to REM in somewhere. Sorry, we can't go." And I remember watching that and thinking, REM is real, and they exist in this universe. What happened to them when Captain Trips hit? What's it like for celebrities? So, like the super, super, super rich would probably helicopter island compound, try to escape the use their money. But what about celebrities? What's an apocalyptic story for somebody who has means and influence, but not, a government official is get me on this plane, get me to the secret bunker, and lock me in with whatever. What happened to REM during the superflu? And that spun in my mind for a long time. And somehow that went from being celebrities, because I'm not a celebrity. I started to think about low-level government officials. High-level, like get the cabinet secretary to blah, blah, blah. But what if you're a member of parliament? What if you're a member of like a state government? What happens to you? And so that's where this story came from, was the notion of what happens to those in whom we have invested the duty to protect, but they may not have internalized that. Because if you want to be president or governor or prime minister, you need to be able to make those tough decisions. If you're just, I'm going to run for office, I'm going to represent the people of my neighborhood or my city, and that's really all you aspire to. And then a situation thrusts all of this on you, and you have to choose what you're going to surrender. And this character becomes part of the literal machinery of government.
Yes, and he has to do it literally in front of the friends and neighbors. Yep. And has to try to avoid... I think we've already probably passed spoilers for this particular story, so he has to sort of decide whether to sacrifice them as well. Which is, I don't think I've ever seen a story from a point of view like this before. And point of view is pretty much everything in a short story.
And I work for the federal government in Canada, and so I've met politicians, I've met senior level politicians who hold cabinet positions, I've met lower level politicians, and I've also worked for well over 10 years now. Can't quite do the math in the moment, but in the public service, where I'm not quite sure how it is in the U.S., but in Canada, the public service is apolitical. So I do not report to the political head of my department, which is called a minister. In the U.S., it's usually a secretary. I do not work for him or her. I work for the head of the Privy Council, which is the head of all of the public service. And so we are there to faithfully execute the agenda of the government of the day. But that gave me a lot of insight to what would probably happen if there was this kind of incident, and what would happen with that kind of a person in that position. And a lot of them would rely, if you're a rookie, on your chief of staff, because there's the machinery of government, figuratively speaking, being policies and procedures and rules and all of this, and is a quagmire. So you're going to need somebody with a lot of experience in that system to advise you. And so this guy going from rookie MP, member of parliament, to suddenly very, very, very minor cabinet role, to suddenly being promoted to a very important portfolio and part of the surviving government that needs to escape the city so they can continue. There's a lot of my own personal experience went into that story, and so maybe that's some of where, I mean, I was just trying to tell a good story. Maybe if you're taking that away, maybe that's where part of that comes from is when there's a scramble, you know, we all do the best we can, and there's very, very talented people in government, and there's the, you know, you think, oh, public servants, oh, they're overpaid and underworked, and that's not true. But when there is a crisis, when you are in such a hierarchy, sometimes it's, here's where my authority begins and ends, and I'm looking for somebody higher up to give me direction. And when you have an attack on the city, and in the story, we don't quite know who's attacking. It's an enemy. They're not really described in great detail, and that's unimportant. There's a threat, and the attack happens, and then there's chaos, and we're just trying to do the best we can.
Who it isn't, because they say, I've got to get the Americans off their ass.
Yes, it's not the Americans.
Fight, and there are a couple of other countries, I think, that are mentioned as allies or people that they're negotiating with. So it's sort of left. Yeah,
I intentionally picked. We see the enemy's flag. They're I don't think I even call them tanks. I forget. I intentionally wanted to say, are they extraterrestrial or not? But like they're battle machines or something. And there's a flag that has the colors that at the time no country has those colors. So I wanted to leave it intentionally ambiguous about who they are, because it really doesn't matter who we're at war with. It's just we're at war with a very dangerous enemy.
When it has to, I feel like it's almost necessary that you don't say, because if you say, once you identify the enemy, that colors the story of the of your protagonist.
Yeah.
In a way, that now you've kept it completely focused on this one person.
Yep.
It's very. I've found the stories in the book are really well focused, and if it's not damning with faint praise, to say the prose is incredibly clean.
Thank you very much.
And lean in this. There's not a dialogue attribution out of place.
Thank you.
In it, and I hope that's not. I hope that's that you would think that would go without saying for folks, but it's really not.
If everyone's got their style, and you know, people have asked me, you know, who are your major influences, and I would say, I'll leave that to others, because I know writers I like, but I'm trying to find my own voice, and I hope there's some variance in style from story to story there. But I do like really, really clean prose, and so what I will do with my manuscript sometimes is I'll sit down, go to a random page with a red pen in my hand and just read. I'm not editing for plot, because if you start editing at the beginning, you edit for plot, you edit for story. I'll just go through and read a line and be like, you know what, that doesn't add anything, and I'll take that out. Or all this 20-word sentence needs to communicate is the doors in the north wall, and can I do that cleaner? And so trying to get that story down and down and down. That a definition of perfection that I heard recently talking about government program, I think it was perfection isn't when you can't add anything more. Perfection is when you can't take anything more away.
That's a great way to look at it.
That's what I like to do, is just, I want to take this out, I want to take this out. And that's not to say that there might not be places that are not necessarily bloated, but I'll say rich, because I'm trying to get across an idea. I'm trying to get across a feeling or a setting. So I will try to be a bit lush with the description, or with the dialogue, or with the prose, or what have you. But that's mechanically a calculated element for me, is I want to get this across to you. And it's one thing if, like right now, we're sitting in kind of like a side lobby of a hotel, and that's maybe all somebody needs to know. But it might be that the temperature and the sound and like the paint could probably use a touch up, but it's not bad. Those kind of details, especially with horror, if I really need to ground you in a situation, then I can be a bit more expressive with it. But sometimes I'll write a scene where it's, don't need this dialogue, don't need this description. I just need somebody to know we're here with this, and the dialogue will tell you what you need to know.
I feel like for this particular scene, it might be important for me to tell people that there are a couple of dozen paper goodie bags behind us, and you probably heard the sound of people rummaging through them.
Yes.
Just a few minutes ago, just to put you in the scene here at NECON, which is where we are.
Yeah.
So do you consider this, we'll get into the genre question here, which is always somewhat sticky. Do you call yourself a speculative fiction writer? Do you call yourself a sci-fi writer or a horror writer, or does it change from story to story, project to project?
I consider myself a speculative fiction writer. What I say, like on my business cards and my website, is I write horror and dark science fiction, because that's the easiest way to sum it up. But I would say more broadly, I'm probably a dark speculative fiction writer. That there's some stories in the collection that don't fall into a neat category. There's a story in there called They Told Me to Shuffle Off This Mortal Infinite Loop that I don't even know what it's about. It jumps back and forth between a couple of different point of view characters who may or may not be the same character, just in different points of time. And then there's some sections that are written in code that are in AI, kind of waking up and becoming aware of what's happening with this one or several characters. And then there's another section that's kind of like a comment board talking about what's happening in the prose that also may or may not be the AI, and probably not. So I don't know if that's science fiction. I don't know if that's new weird. I don't, but I'll take whatever anybody wants to call it. One of the things I say, especially if I'm teaching workshops on writing, is the author has the least amount to say concerning what a story is actually about. Because my stories are meaningless until they get into somebody else's head, and then it's whatever you take away from it and your own experience and your own background and what you take from the story. That's how art works for paintings or for film or for prose. But by and large, I tend to be a dark speculative fiction writer, and the reason I say dark is I think I've only written one real happy ending. No, there's a story in there, Brief Candles has a happy ending. I'll say it has a happy ending. So two. But the other one I was thinking of is a story called A Darkness That Binds Our Heart, Binds Our Fate, that appeared in On Spec magazine. And it's historical science fiction, and it supposes that knot tying was a very advanced technology during the Renaissance. And you could do all kinds of different things, like there's a knot that you could tie that in order to effectively untie it, you had to bind your own hands in a knot. So as you undo the knot, and for those of you I'm pantomiming, reaching above my head to undo a knot to get it around my wrists. So now the knot is undone, whatever it was holding fast, but now my hands are tied. And then I need a particular skill set to undo that knot.
Right.
So very much within the realm of possibilities, but doesn't really exist as far as I know. But anyway, that story ends with a grand master in this art blackmails a city in which he is the grand master of this knot tying technology into accepting the marriage of his daughter to what people see as an enemy. There's been a war, but the war's been over for 10 years, but there's still tensions. And so his daughter wants to get married, and everyone's saying, oh, you can't do that. And so he, long story short, blackmails them into accepting this. And it ends with everyone at the wedding like, oh, we're blackmailed. This is great. Congratulations on the wedding. So kind of a happy ending, but I'm not morose, and I kind of have some downbeat endings, but I'm not. I worry about humanity. We tend to, when we're stressed, resort to our worst base instincts, and so that's what the story is. But I think it's more an idea of not that all people are bad or that humanity is a terrible thing. This is what we sometimes do, and so my collection is trying to reflect on that. And if people think humanity is terrible, that's what they take. And if they say, you know what, maybe we should try to do better in different things, that's also as valid a reaction. But mostly I want people to enjoy, read the stories and enjoy them. You know, not everything's going to be for everybody, but if you have one or two stories that were like, wow, that was a rip-roaring good time, great. I'm a writer, but I want to also entertain. I'm trying to say something in my stories, but if you don't get to that level, it's not like every story has a message and you need to take it. If you just read it and it's great, awesome. If you read it and you take something away from it, that's great too. And especially if you take something that I wasn't intending to put in there, like I said, I have the least amount to say about what these stories are about. Or what these stories mean. Like I can tell you the plot, but what they mean, that's up to the reader.
Well, yeah, because anything that you write, once you give it over to the public domain, it's kind of you can argue for something, but I don't think you look
Po-
particularly good.
Point of order: it is not in the public domain. It is copywritten.
Well, no, I mean,
But
once,
give it over to the public readership. Yeah.
yeah, into public.
I don't want anybody to misunderstand. Matt Moore said it was in the public domain. It's mine now.
You didn't make the George Romero mistake from Night of the Living Dead and not copyright the thing.
I have a very good publisher who made sure that there was a copyright notice on there. Yeah.
Yes. Well, one of the things I was going to say about this, what I love about it is I think there are different moods in there, as well as different genres. And I know it's sort of tired to compare things to music sometimes, but I like some albums that are stylistically pure, but I also love an album where you can't really figure out where this band is. Are they a rock band? Are they a country band? Are they you know, whatever they are that sort of float around? If it can take you to a bunch of different places.
Yeah.
If it can, there's something that's heavy and then something that makes you laugh and it takes you on this. I feel like those are the albums that are probably going to stick with you. I mean, and you can do that stylistically or you can do that emotionally. There's a lot of different ways. Some of these I feel like would be, if you put them in a horror collection, they would be horror. If you put them in a science fiction collection, they'd be science fiction. I feel like there's a sort of an analogy to Joe Hill's last book has. I wish that I had sat down to look. There's 4 novellas in it.
Okay.
There's one of them that is just more of a straight up heart-rending drama, and then there are others that have a fantastical element to me.
In American Ghosts, a couple of years back, the short story collection was like that. As a real mixed bag of different stories.
Yeah, I like that those things can sit together.
Yeah.
In one place. It didn't feel out of place to me that one thing has a theme about police brutality and the next one has this skydiver trapped on a cloud that he's not sure is going to dissolve underneath him or not.
Yeah.
One is brutally real, the other one is more fantastical.
Yep.
But I mean, you've got the one we mentioned again. I'll try not to do spoilers, but there is one that there are a few of these things that are really definitely horror.
Yes.
You mentioned the Ascension had zombies, and there's an interesting take on werewolves.
Yep.
In here, and you're not a gore guy, but there are a few things in here that are particularly frightening sort of images. I'm thinking of the I'm blanking on the name of the story, but the army doctor and the junkie.
That which does not kill you.
Yes, that doesn't kill you. I don't know how much you want to say about, because that's a reveal in the story. There are some really, it's kind of, would you call it body horror? What you do with that?
There's definitely, there's elements of body horror in there. I don't know if I would plunk it solidly into the body horror, a subgenre of horror, because it's more, as we were talking about before, it's more about identity. That the main character is somebody who, the basics of the story is it's near future. We're using suits of battle armor to fight another enemy that may or may not be in the same continuum as machinery of government. Don't know. Could be. Could not be. And there is a field surgeon who is taking body parts, and our main character, Teller, is just a corpsman. Who, to numb the horrors of what he's seeing, has become addicted to some kind of hallucinogenic pill. And the surgeon, whose name escapes me.
Was it Lynn?
I think I refer to her as by her last name. But the surgeon is his source and basically is blackmailing him into getting these body parts to do something with that he doesn't know. Now, if you're following along, you can kind of see where I'm going, but if not, I'll leave it there. But there's definitely body horror, but the body horror is meant to also shock Teller, the main character, who is dealing with what's real and what's not real because he's addicted to these pills. So there's the shock of the body horror. There's some science fiction elements to there. There's just the horrors that war inflicts on people of all levels. Teller is just average person, and the physician is a physician. She's a doctor, and she's an officer, and it's just Teller's world falling apart as he discovers what this doctor is doing, and he's not quite sure if he can believe it. He's not quite sure if it's real. But yeah, there's definitely body horror elements in there. But I would say it's probably more psychological horror because it's Teller's journey through this hellish hellscape of war, and what this physician is doing and what it does to him as somebody who is generally trying to recover. He's on a road of recovery because he's recognized how far he's gone and wants to recover, and then discovers these horrible things.
Right. And even within that story, there's sort of a shift because it's a very gritty, realistic story, and it's a personal story, and remains such through. Yeah. But then there's this sort of John Carpenter, The Thing-esque reveal that happens there. Yeah. I think that probably gives people a fairly good idea of what that is, without telling people exactly what it is.
Yeah, and I wanted the element of what is this surgeon doing with the body parts, and then we find out, and I wanted it to be shocking. I needed, when you have tension in the story, what's she doing? I can either never tell you, which is its own story form, or I can show you, but I have to turn it up to 11. I can't just be, it's this or it's that. It needs to be shocking for both the reader, but also shocking for Teller, because we're very tight for his point of view, the point of the character in the story.
And
it was a lot of fun coming up with what eventually he finds, because it's not just one thing, it's this chamber of horrors. And that was just a lot of fun as I'm writing this story, of kind of like doing sketches of what I wanted him to find.
Oh, you're literally sketching these things out. Are you an artist as well?
No, but
You have notebook doodles of these awful things.
A lot of my stories start as just sketches with boxes and arrows, so I kind of like would sketch out, okay, how would, not to give too much away, but how would this fit with this? And looking at like where would different body parts meet? I'm giving away the entire story, but where would they meet?
Well, I think even seeing that, when people get to that part, they won't. I don't think they'll have guessed what they're going to get to, even with what you just said.
But that's one of the fun parts of writing is it's like, okay, this is one of the times when I can really go overboard with certain things, because the story needs to have that overboard element, because Teller thinks, oh my God, I'm high, I'm jonesing, I'm really freaking out, or is this real? So that was a really good fun thing as a writer to say, I'm going to go whole hog on this.
Well, that must be a temptation, seeing these sort of bursts of macabre imagination in some of these. That must be a temptation for a more straight story, like Silverman's Game is very much unless I'm missing something, a straight sort of drama, straight up drama between a bunch of kids find themselves in a house they didn't think was occupied, and find themselves being held hostage by a guy, and that's where the sort of drama comes from. You could have thrown these things in there too if you wanted to.
But it would have been a very different story, because I can't remember if it was inspired by Saw or not, but if the timeline would add up. But I remember, I don't know if I'd seen a movie or if I'd seen Saw, but just the idea of somebody saying, all right, I'm going to take you innocent people and put you in an impossible situation and make you make an impossible choice. And I thought for a couple of days about what would that be? What would that shape be? And so I'm not going to reveal what the rules of Silverman's Game are, and I found later there is an actual Silverman's Game, and it's some kind of, I think it's an economic, it's kind of like a Schrodinger's cat for economics. It's imagine this and imagine that, what would you spend? And you think you're supposed to spend more, but in reality the masses you should spend less or something. There's a Wikipedia page for Silverman's Game. Had I known, I wouldn't have titled it that, but Silverman's Game is 3 teens break into a house that they think is abandoned. The homeowner is home, forces them into the basement, and gives them rules to this game that they have to play. Otherwise, all of them are going to die. And the rules of this game he gives them is that one of them is going to die. And he says that this is something inspired by, because his last name is Silverman, which is a Jewish name, is inspired by a game I think his uncle or his grandfather had to play in the Warsaw Ghetto that the SS forced others to play. So I wanted to give it kind of that, he didn't come up with it, there's a history there. And so I kind of played with that, like, yeah, there's no room for this, for the supernatural there. This is a straight up psychological horror story. And because there's no supernatural, it kind of takes away a bit of a safety net of, oh, you know, there are no ghosts, so this ghost story couldn't happen. Mm-hmm. But this story very well could, because it's just I'm not going to say madman, because Silverman is very, very sane, but just a right. criminal, a gun loaded with one bullet, and some very, very specific rules that these three teenagers, and the teenagers, in their panic, need to figure out a way to survive.
But the other wonderful thing about that is, because it's in the context of this collection, and some things are supernatural and some things aren't, while you're reading each story, if you're reading a story like that, you're thinking, well, maybe there's three kids locked in a basement, something supernatural could happen. It keeps your expectations sort of off kilter.
Yeah. It's funny. A little bit. When I was putting the collection together, I asked friends who are editors for advice on how do you put the stories in order, and the advice was all very similar. It's, you don't want to have a similar tone or similar length or similar subject matter back to back, because then it's another one of these, and it's easy to put down. But there's also that notion of a mix of, and I haven't looked at the table of contents in a little bit, but you have some sci-fi and then some horror and then some nondescript. So yeah, I really like your idea of it's an album, and I was talking with a friend about a year ago about the idea of albums as a holistic idea have really gone away. Now some bands still do.
I lament that.
Now it's a collection of 10 to 12 songs that may or may not hold together, versus an album, which is you take one song out of that album and it's not quite the same beast anymore. Mm-hmm. And so with this collection, I was trying to mix it up and combine things. So Silverman's Game, the straight ahead psychological horror, is between a werewolf story, which is with sci-fi elements, and the story I was talking about earlier with the mix of computer code and chat rooms and different vignettes with a character that may be the same person or maybe different people. So it's, yeah, you definitely want to make sure that there is that mix of things, so that when you start reading, what I wanted was just you get a slightly different flavor. So it's like having a meal, and you want that complexity and that difference. And I never quite really thought about that. Yeah, the idea of you're carrying the expectations of the previous story into the next story, so when it isn't supernatural, there's that surprise. And then when we go to the next story, it's, oh, this is something completely different.
Well, that said, what do you think these stories have in common?
The theme, to go back to what we were talking about off the top, was the idea of personal apocalypses. Mm-hmm. So in Silverman's Game, the main character, how it starts is the main character is 12, 13, 14 in the beginning of the story. Idolizes, just worships his older brother. His older brother is the coolest kid ever. Of course, the older brother is, you suck, you know, I don't want to spend time with you. Mm-hmm. And the older brother's best friend is just a real mean bully asshole. And the main character, because the mother is working, the main character's, the mother says to the older brother, take care of your brother today. The older brother's like, I've got something to do with my friend Jack. And so the older brother has no choice but to bring the younger brother on this I'm not going to say adventure, because it's not an adventure. They're planning, Jack and the older brother are planning to break into this house, and the younger brother is there, and the younger brother wants to impress them. And so the apocalypse there is the younger brother's, the narrator's impression of who his older brother is starts to change. And it's both in a good way and in a bad way. Mm-hmm. And how in the end, when they figure out how to resolve Silverman's Game, the narrator's world has just been completely shattered. And the story is bookended by stories in the present tense of how the main character begins with him. He's an adult, he's married, he's looking at a house with his wife, goes into the basement of this house in the present, and there's this smell that just completely overwhelms him, and it's a PTSD response. He has to run out of the house, and then he ruminates on what happened in the past. So his world is destroyed. Mm-hmm. That which does not kill you, Teller, horrified by war, addicted to drugs, wants to get off drugs, stumbles into this thing and is blackmailed into this thing, and his world is destroyed because he thinks that this doctor, who is blackmailing him but does want to help him get clean, his view of her is completely changed, and the idea of he thought the horrors of war were the worst things ever, but he realizes that this doctor, who's also his lover, and it's a bit rapey that she is kind of blackmailing him into sex as well. His world is completely destroyed because it's not just the horrors of war out there; it's that there's something sinister that he's been sharing a bed with. Mm-hmm. So,
and his world is destroyed in possibly two different ways. If he's hallucinating the things, then it's destroyed in one way. If he's not, it's destroyed in another. Which is a wonderful, that sort of pops up in the last few paragraphs of that.
So I hope some of the stories have some degree of hope in them, that even in the downbeat ending, I hope that the reader can take away the idea of hope that a bad decision or a loss of faith in yourself or loss of faith in others may not have led some of these narrators down these paths. The very last story in the collection, speaking of ordering collections and anthologies, one of the advice I got is your best story should be the last story, and your second best should be the first story.
That's weird. That's the same. That's the exact philosophy that a lot of comedians use to build a set.
Because what they said is the first story. It may not be the second best, but what it is ground the reader in what you're about and who you are and what you're trying to say. And the first story is a story called Delta Pi, which is a kind of a math joke, if you will, that delta is the symbol for change and pi is the mathematical constant. And it's a story about what would happen if the value of pi changed in our world. So it's a mix of science fiction and horror, and owes a lot to Dreams in the Witch House by H.P. Lovecraft, where there's a witch and there's strange mathematics, and I think a character figures out how to escape, or the witch figures out how to escape a jail cell mathematically. She does the calculations and realizes, there's a direction I can head that'll take me out of this three-dimensional space and into n-dimensional space and get out. So Full Moon or Delta Pi owes a lot to that. But that's what I wanted to introduce people to. Is it's also a very, very personal story. Is saying, I'm telling a story that's very, very personal. There's emotional stakes on the line, and I'm going to mix some horror and some science fiction. So that was
personal
the first
for you, personal for the character.
For the character.
Okay, yeah.
Because in the story, the character, and it's not a spoiler, but the character's in a wheelchair. And so when the value of pi, which affects diameter versus circumference, begins to change, the wheels on his chair, the math governing something as simple as a circle, changes. And so for him, he's tangibly affected by this change. So
it affects his mobility, which is very important at one point.
And as pi is changing, the circumference of the wheels are increasing. And so what I liked about the story is I tried to visualize what that looked like, and I couldn't, and I'm like, I've got it. So I can just put it in prose. I'm not a visual artist. And so as he's trying to wheel himself away, the effort he knows will take him one revolution takes him much, much longer because the circumference is going up, even though the diameter is staying the same. That's really high-level math, and I hope everybody paid attention in geometry class. But the last story, they Touch the Sky, they say, everyone said the last story has to be the best because everyone will read a collection how they want, but if they read it linearly and that's the last one, that's the one they're going to remember. And so that story is very, very personal to me because it's the basic idea is the sky has fallen, and I don't say what that means. It's just that the sky is reachable from a 40-story building in Toronto. And so that's as high as the sky goes, and everything above that, we don't know what happened to it. And the story is that if you touch the sky physically, any regret or sadness or depression or hope or inspiration or joy that you have, you give it all up. And the sky is gray. And so you become gray. And so it's a very personal story of somebody going up to the sky and wondering if they're going to touch it for their own reasons. But what I didn't quite realize as I was writing it was this was me processing the death of my mother. And the idea of that fundamental change that we all, we all know we're going to outlive our parents, but when it actually happens, it's really, really complicated. And you think about your life and your relationship, and nobody ever has a perfect relationship with their parents. And so this story was really me coming to grips with this idea of my mom is dead, she's never going to come back, and do I, and also depression and negative, and do I touch the sky and accept, all right, my mom's dead, I'm always going to be sad, or do I resist it and think, you know what, it hurts, but I have to move on and within it and keep living and enjoying my life and internalize and accept there's this change in my life, there's this demarcation line between when my mom was alive and my mom was dead, but there's so many other demarcation lines and there's so much more life left to live. So I guess Touch the Sky, they say, also does have ultimately a happy ending. Bit of a spoiler, sorry, but it's more the prose and the internal mechanics of, or not mechanics, but thought process of this character who's up there deciding whether or not they are going to touch the sky and give up, or not touch the sky and continue to fight in a world that is essentially given up.
But there's a lot of that in the music that I love too. As somebody who loves Americana and country music, there's a lot of music that I feel is hopeful that a lot of other people listen to and think is just a big downer. But a lot of it is describing all the terrible things you've been through. But the message to me is, I'm still here, motherfucker. Yeah. Give it another shot, because you didn't, if your first shot didn't take, I can take anything you give.
I'm a big fan of 9 Inch Nails. And I also I'm not a huge fan, but I like Marilyn Manson. Also in their Soundgarden, Tool, Rage Against the Machine. But coming back to 9 Inch Nails and also Marilyn Manson, a lot of people say, like, you're to blame for people killing themselves. And for myself and my issues with depression and talking with other people, it's the kids who don't listen to that probably are more at risk, because what those you listen to those songs and it's like, this is the catharsis,
right?
And I'm going to sing along and cry as these lyrics that, if you read them on the page, are not a really good message, but it's somebody else feels the same way I do. I'm not alone, I'm not unique, I'm not a monster, I'm not a loser. Somebody else feels like that. There's hope there now, so I can find solace and an outlet in that music. The same way, we're here at NECON, which is full of horror writers, and there's some of the most well-adjusted people.
I was going to say that. That's
the love here and the camaraderie and the sense of family among people who write what...
The inclusiveness.
Yeah, a lot of people say, oh my God, that's so terrible. How can you read that? Well, it's Stephen King and Danse Macabre said that our reptile brain are like these gators in the basement that feed on raw meat. Because we're evolved or devolved, depending on your point of view, from a much more primitive and brutal animal, and that's still kind of there. And if it's some people get drunk and get in fist fights, other people, nerds like us, are like, no, I'm just going to curl up with this horror novel and get a little visceral outlet of this bent up monkey energy to start flinging poop at somebody or be violent. And here's this outlet I can read, or these films, or these video games, or this music that is the outlet. So, I agree with you in terms of music that does seem hopeless and terrible, but there might be a message of hope underneath it, or at the very least, there is the identification of, I feel like this, I felt like this so much, it inspired me to write, engineer, record, mix, perform this song. Does this strike a resonance in you? Oh yes, it does.
I would say to that as well, to anybody who would think that this group of people here at NECON were dark, twisted people. How much laughter have you heard in this past 50 minutes that we've been talking behind us? How much pure joy do you hear going on around us in the background of this podcast?
I have never seen a place where men hug so freely and sincerely. That I'm in my mid-40s, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s, which was a bit repressive with men shake hands, and I, as a child, I was very physically demonstrative of my, not inappropriately so, but of my affection. And that was that is not appropriate. Men don't do that, and kind of carry that in. It felt like I'm wrong to want to, and I'm also I'm a very shy introvert, and I do not like casual contact. The idea of, oh hey, how you doing, and a touch on the elbow or touch on the shoulder, or like I barely know you, but give me a hug. It's like, fuck no. Like, do not assume that. Don't touch me. Mm-hmm. Let alone like the inappropriateness of unconsented contact aside. Don't touch me.
Right.
But
these are all introverts, and we all know.
But there are other people for whom the only appropriate greeting is a hug.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's a genuine demonstration of affection. And I find this here at NECON is it's a very welcoming and inclusive place. Like, this is my second time here. This is your second time here.
Yep. And we were roommates last year.
And
that's another thing. This is Camp NECON.
Yeah.
It's not like other conferences.
Yeah.
It literally has a camp. The reason why you're hearing all these people in the background is because we're about to go out into the courtyard, and half of these people are going to drink way more scotch than they should.
Yep.
I'm going to get out my guitar with two other folks and play for the next couple of hours.
Yep.
There's a soggy roast. I didn't know what soggies were.
I think it's short for sausage, but I'm not quite sure.
That happens a couple of times over a 4-day period.
And it's spelled S-A-U-G-Y, not S-O-G-G-Y.
Yeah. So this is a particular culture here that you don't see in a lot of places. And I think, to be the armchair psychologist, which is, I guess, part of the gig, everybody here has faced the idea, at least in fiction, of impermanence.
Yeah.
So I think there's an acceptance of the idea that we should just be ourselves now and as much as we can, especially this year, because there a couple of people who are longtime members of this community have gone just before, and we've got some people in the hospital.
Yep.
And if ever there were a group that sort of, I think, knows how to face that, has prepared themselves for the idea of somebody not being here anymore, it's this group of horror and genre writers.
And I also think that with that idea is the celebration of life, whatever that is. And I'm not a sunshine and rainbows kind of person. I'm not one of these, every day is the first day of the rest of your life, which technically is true. But like, get up and like enjoy life and be happy. And I see folks who are perpetually happy, and either they're hiding something horrible, and I have sympathy for them, or either their upbringing or their brain chemistry or a combination of both is in such a way that's how they are. Mm-hmm. But if it's the latter, you have a different set of experiences in biology than other people. So just saying to them, get up and be happy, doesn't ring true.
Right.
And this is a group where I think you can be your closer to your best self, mm-hmm. your idealized version of yourself, however that is. I was talking with an author about tattoos, and I don't have tattoos, but I have nothing against it. It's just nothing I've ever found that I would want to permanently have in my body. But I think it's great that if you get a tattoo or a piercing, or you dye your hair, or something that you're trying to find a better way to express your idealized self. I'm not going to say perfect, because perfect implies there's nothing more to do, but more and more closer to your idealized self, who you've always wanted to be. And that's what I love about this convention. What I love about the speculative fiction community in general, but this convention overall, is that acceptance of who I am here is very different than who I am in my day job. As a nature of I work in the government, it's a somewhat conservative in the social sense, not political sense. Idea of I'm wearing a shirt that says out of body, be back in 5 minutes.
Right. Do those people know what you do at the day job? Did they read your work?
I don't know if they've read my work, but I'm open about it that this is what I write. But I wouldn't wear the shirts I wear and say the things I say at work, because the nature of that is my work identity. Mm-hmm. But I love being part of the speculative fiction community that I only started writing seriously about 12 years ago now. And so up until my 30s, I was trying to be somebody else. I was trying to be somebody that kind of fit into other people's expectations and other places where I thought I should be. Mm. And it wasn't until I got into the writing community, and I'm like, I can be my introverted self. I can sit and enjoy an argument between two people. My first con experience was at Asher in Toronto in 2008, and I saw two guys almost come to blows over which is the more unrealistic, faster-than-light travel system, Star Trek Warp Drive or Star Wars Lightspeed.
That is not here necessarily.
It's not here, but they were just so far down in the minutia and loving it. And
Right.
I loved their enthusiasm until it then began to butt heads and faces got red and a bit of masculine posturing. I'm like, all right, this is bullshit. But this
You will
community.
hear those kind of arguments here, but you won't. They don't.
Yeah, it's not. It's over other things, but
Yeah,
it's
it won't come to blows here.
it's a great community because you can really be yourself, and it can help you find who you are without imposing that on you. It's just this openness of whoever you really are. Let that come through here because we love you for it.
Right, and if you're standing awkwardly in the corner, someone will come over and ask if you would like to be introduced
Yep.
to other people.
Yep.
And if you don't want to, stay in that corner
Yep. Yeah.
until you're ready for it,
Yep.
and somebody will guide you
Yep.
into the throng.
Yep.
So that's because I feel like everybody here recognizes the signs. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that person standing over there, because in some places you would be yanked in and forced to socialize. Here it's
Or
more
excluded, like that fucking loser standing over there. Like, why aren't they socializing? Fuck
Right.
them, let them stand over there. But
Here it's like, oh, I know what they're doing. Well, here, would you like to be here? Or all right, we'll wait. Yeah, that's NECON. So if anybody is, which takes place in Rhode Island every year, we're at the 39th edition.
yes.
Apparently next year will be the big 40th edition. We'll see what happens then. So what do you have coming up? What are you said you're working on?
I'm working on a novel. I finished the first draft in, let's say, November of 2018. I intentionally let it sit for about 3 or 4 months. I could separate what's in my head from what's on the page, because if you don't give it that time, you're still seeing what's in your head on the page. Went back, reread it, made a ton of notes, did a process that I call re-outlining, which I will give credit to a fellow Ottawa writer named Kate Hartfield, which is you come up with the outline based on what you actually read, and then you kind of go back to what you originally envisioned, and then you might find you're missing things, or you need to add some things in, or some things don't make sense. Making notes, reveals, making sure the tension is on. So right now I'm about a quarter of the way through the revision. I hope to have it done by the end of the summer. My publisher, Chizine Publications, has said that they want to see it, so I will send it to them and take it from there.
Do you feel like a novelist yet? You're established yourself as a short story writer, but we sort of hinted that those are two different skill sets.
I've gotten comfortable with the mechanics of it. I'm a very process and rules-based person. That doesn't mean to say I don't appreciate art or subtlety, but I'm very good at figuring out process. So I needed to figure out what's the process for writing a novel, and I think for this one I've got it. Because I think that this second draft will be pretty close to the end, and I know some writers who go through 4 or 5 novel revisions till they finally nail it, so I think I found the editing mechanics I need for who I am as a writer, and also how the way my brain works, to take this from first draft, which is always shit, to second draft that is, okay, very, very close to submittable, and I probably need a third polish or clean them. But I think I've kind of cracked that nut. I've got 2 ideas in mind for what I think my second novel will be, and kind of in parallel figuring those out about which one will be, click, you're ready to start writing right now.
Right, because that's an important thing too. Just it's so tough to get the book out in the first place. But once you've got the book out, you should probably have that second idea ready to go as well. So when this comes out, will people who have read It's Not the End recognize the style, the themes?
I hope so, that the idea of personal apocalypse and annihilation and choices very much is in this novel. The basis of it is using the Freudian idea of ego, superego, and id as supernatural forces. Now, not sticking closely to Freud, but just the basic idea of the superego saying, suppress what you want, you're part of a collective, do what's good for the collective. And the id that's like, do whatever the fuck you want, it feels good, there's no tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. And putting those two forces against each other in this town. And so the conflict is what I call the triumph of the ego, in the Freudian sense of figuring out who you are and balancing those two forces. Because in this story, these two forces are not balanced, and there's something supernatural happening in a town where there's this sense of superego is suffused throughout this town for a very sinister purpose, and a very sinister agent of chaos who's all id shows up and encourages people to do whatever the hell they want, whatever it feels like. And so there's conflicting forces, and the characters that are my main characters are caught between these two. Because some people go completely one way, some the other. So my main characters are those who are caught between these two. And so for them, it's the triumph of the ego, because they realize balance is what prevents annihilation. That I need to figure out who I am with these two supernatural forces that are affecting me to survive and achieve victory and achieve balance in this town. So I hope so. They're very, very personal stories for the characters. I really spent a lot of time trying to figure out who these characters were, so I hope the character work that I hope comes across in the short fiction is there on a larger scale in the novel. And yeah, I think if you like my writing, it does go all over the place, but I think the idea of if It's Not the End and Other Lies is an album of songs, this is kind of like a concept album of one long song with but with the same kind of sense, the same kind of aesthetic that I have, because I'm
jazz odyssey.
Yeah, I'm me, and I write, and I don't think I'm trying to do anything different. I'm trying to push myself, but I'm not trying to push myself into the unfamiliar and the unknown, where I'm just going to flounder. Like, I'm never going to write romance. I'm never going to write high fantasy, but I do want to. I wanted to take what I've done in short fiction on a much larger tableau, and I really enjoyed writing this novel. Learned things about myself. A couple of characters that were you're just in the scene because the main character needs somebody to talk to, and you say, yes, you need to do that right now, and then the character is just boom, like very important to the plot, takes over certain things, and it's like, oh my god, your thematic arc that I wanted to explore in this novel but never thought I could get to, and you're doing it. Like, God bless you. I don't know where you came from, but you're like, I'm so glad you showed up and stuck with it.
I really look forward to seeing how, because that's a very intellectual concept. I look forward to seeing how that plays out with characters in a concrete town.
It's not like I touch it. It's just kind of like I wanted a model. So if you hear this podcast or you talk to me and I say this, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. But I'm not like, Freud was awesome and I'm building a religion on Freud. It's just I needed a framework, and so did some research. I did my undergrad in psychology, so. Oh, right, the ego comes out of the id, but the superego is a separate concept. And so when I was kind of confused about, basically I'm building a magic system, and when I was confused about how the magic system worked, I'd go back to Freud. And Freud would say, oh, there's this, like in Freud later would say that id is thanatos and eros, so life energy and death energy. And Freud basically argued, we're all trying to kill ourselves, but we're also trying to feel good at the same time. And so I'm like, that helps solve this plot problem I was having of this and this. So what I can do for myself is know this element that's all id has these dual elements. So if it says to somebody, go and have as much sex as you want, the person's going to be like, all right, you go off and get in as many fist fights as you want. And then I'm like, why would that person do that if the id is all about the pleasure principle? Well, part of the pleasure is you're trying to kill yourself, so that's thanatos. Okay, I can make that work. So at the high level, in the novel, it all makes sense. But I'm basing like almost my magic system on the Freudian idea. And I'll say this as somebody who did their undergrad in psychology, I don't subscribe to Freudian psychology as a reasonable method of counseling. I don't think it works because he was a cokehead, but as a supernatural system for a pantheon. Well, there's not a huge number of gods, but as my supernatural magic system and rules was really, really interesting.
And just to be clear, Jungians can probably enjoy the novel just as well as
Jung what?
It follows a Carl Jung.
Yeah.
It's not an exclusive.
Well, in university I wrote a very, very Jungian story, and I didn't realize it. I had a character who heard a voice in his head that was a different personality than him, and it knew things that he didn't know. So there's something supernatural there. So I wrote that in high school. It'll stay there. But I wrote a sequel to it where the voice gets out of his head and is a physical entity in the real world, not quite realizing Stephen King was writing The Dark Half at exactly the same time. So, but I called the main character, whose name is David, called that other part the shadow. And I wrote the first draft. I finished it. And it's like, it's terrible. It's horrible. But I then was taking a course in psychology and was just introduced to Jung with archetype, and the shadow is an archetype, and anima and animus, and I'm reading this like, oh my God, I've borrowed almost all of Jungian psychology as my supernatural rules for the story, which was really kind of weird because Jung says that all art comes out of a collective unconscious that we all share. So it was very, very meta that my story about the collective unconscious came from the collective unconscious because, of course, it's the collective unconscious. And so my story about archetypes, of course, because it's all archetypes. So I was like, okay, I may come back to that later on, but probably not. Some stuff when you write when you're 20 and horny and carrying a course load should just stay there.
Of course, at the very least, that's an indication that maybe clinical psychology is not the place you're going to wind up, or psychiatry.
Well, I ended up actually did a social psychology, which treats people as basically data generating engines. I said I like mechanisms and process and rules. So social psychology is about the human animal in society, and there's very, very research flavor. So I'm not a clinician.
Well, that's in a short story somewhere where somebody was. I'm trying to remember which story it was. Somebody needs quantifiable data about their depression, about whether people like them.
Oh, that's probably, they told me to shuffle off this mortal coil.
Yeah. There's a one point where somebody's judging themselves by data they've collected.
Yeah, I think the machines, in the story, and it's all over the place, but there's an AI awakens in the and is aware of the main character or characters and start, because all they can do is process data. And so I think it's the machines are trying to figure out, based on what they know of human psychology, will this character, there's a possible suicide in it. Will this character do it or not do it? And the machines are trying to figure it out because they don't understand. Right. They're trying to understand humans, and all they can do is use data.
Right. Well, okay. Now I remember this story more vividly. Yeah, because it's examining one guy.
Yeah.
And everybody's. It seems like it's not just AI that's looking at them. It seems like it's
the people in the form,
the country, which is scary as well.
Yeah.
Well, where can people find your stuff and what you're up to?
My website is mattmoorewrites, and that's WRITES.com. That's also my Twitter handle. I have a Facebook page that I don't update very often, just because Facebook pages are dying unless you pay for them. Mm-hmm. But I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Tumblr. I don't update the Tumblr very much, but if you go to my website, you'll find links to all my social media profiles, including where you can buy the book, and it has a complete list of all my previous works, and there's a link to my Amazon page where you can buy other anthologies where my work has appeared.
And places where you're going to be on the reading series, which is a regular thing in Ottawa. Right?
Yes, Ottawa, Ontario, yes.
Ottawa, Ontario.
Not Ottawa, Kansas.
Right. Well, thank you for doing this.
Thank you very much. This is great.
Thank you for spending the time.
Sounds good. Thanks.
An arrow to the head isn't always a trick.
Thanks again to Matt Moore for sitting down to speak with me. You can find out more about him on his website at www.mattmoorewrites.com and on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Matt Moore Writes. You can find out about Chizine Publications on their website, chizinepub.com. And if you liked this or any other episode of the Department of Tangents podcast, please consider leaving us a positive rating and or review on Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find the Department of Tangents on YouTube and Spotify, and find reviews, essays, videos, and more content at www.departmentoftangents.com. And it's getting to that season. If you make short horror films, we've got the Daily Horror Short Film Festival coming up in October, for which I present a new short horror film every day through the month. I'm currently open for suggestions for your favorite shorts as I put together the 2019 edition. I will write about each one and interview some of the filmmakers to give it a bit more depth. Our featured track this week is Windows of Halifax by Steve Poltz from his new album Shine On. I caught up with Poltz at Club Passim in Cambridge last week, and he'll be the subject of next week's episode of the Department of Tangents podcast. You'll hear a bit about the background of this song in that episode. Poltz can write an earnest song or write with a sense of humor, two things that can sometimes feel at odds, at least emotionally. There is a wistfulness in this song to start, but then you get to this kind of gonzo middle section in which two windows are talking about their plight and the unsavory occupants of their houses. Poltz was born in Halifax, spent some time in California, and now lives in Nashville, and that means sometimes his accent changes in weird ways. You can hear that in the conversation between the windows on this song, and I am fairly sure I will never get the opportunity to write that sentence again. Find out more about Steve Poltz at poltz.com and on Twitter under @StevePoltz. This is Windows of Halifax from the new album Shine On by Steve Poltz.
Windows of Halifax were shuttered and closed down. It was almost Christmas Eve. It was quiet on the town. There was snow on the streets. Everyone was inside. I looked at my tree and I slowly cried. Well, I drove in my car. It was like I was on the moon. I thought of a warmer place in the middle of June. Sometimes this old snow makes me so mad. Sometimes for no reason I just feel kinda sad. All the windows of Halifax tonight. Well, the first window says to the second window, "How come you never open up?" And the second window says, "I had my heart broke once, now I just stay closed shut." Well, the first window says, "Maybe you could see some kind of counselor or something. Maybe a window washer could help you see things more clearly. 'Cause I think you're pretty attractive, but you always have your shade pulled down and the sun can never come in." Well, the second window says, "Frig the sun, bye. The girl I love is back in St. Anthony in a big old house with overgrown weeds. She's a beautiful window, and I can see all the way through her to her soul." Back in St. Anthony? Well, I was imported from St. John's. Well, the fellow that lives here, he studied chemistry at Dalhousie University. But truthfully, he flunked out. But he's still a chemist. Well, actually, he's just a drug dealer. And we got people coming in and out of the house all night long. But I never have anybody to talk to. Just bottle caps and cigarette butts being flicked my way. Dalhousie University, you say? Well, the fellow that lives here next door, he studied geography and archaeology over in Antigonish at St. Francis Xavier. But he flunked out too. Now the only mountains he sees are paper mountains from his failed thesis. Yeah, he's got some tinfoil trees, a cardboard river, and an ugly, ugly paper mountain he made out of the drug dealer's trash outside. Sometimes this old snow, it makes me so mad. Sometimes for no reason, I just feel kinda sad. All the windows of Halifax tonight. Well, the windows of the Maritimes, they're all telling stories of the plentiful days, of the cod and the glory, or an explosion that rocked a French cargo ship. In Dartmouth near the harbor, all the windows got clipped. Well, all of these windows, they're all telling stories. Some are so sweet, some are so gory. There was a murder one night no one ever speaks of. All the windows of Halifax tonight.
Dear Young,